welcome to this event, this live LinkedIn Live today. We have. I'm in Switzerland. Our central team, is in Dubai, and Sumana is in Singapore. So we really are getting the world connecting together in one place. This series, this live series, is a very interesting initiative by the Capital Club and the team there. And the initiative is to get to the wider diaspora connected to Dubai and to the Capital Club in some ways. The other thing is that we get thought leaders from all over the world, and I think what we like to do is to connect with them and to make sure that their voices are heard and their messages are shared. And this cross-fertilization that is going on internationally, I think, is one of the key things that is, as we're sitting in the crossroads. So welcome, Sumana. Good morning. Singapore is another crossroads. Dubai is a crossroads. And here in Geneva is another crossroads. The three cities which we may be discussing today in terms of the global shifts that are going on and so on. So Sumana, welcome. Great to have you here. Great privilege to be with you. And so do let us know about yourself. I mean, you have a nice diverse career, and you've done everything from ByteDance to The Economist. I mean, two extremes. So please do share exactly what your background is, and then we can flow from there.
Sure. Thanks, Tariq. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to me. I do like your crossroads analogy. I'm sure that will come up quite a lot in our conversation today. I started my career as a journalist, what I like to call 20 kilograms ago, so as not to give away my age. And then spent a good portion of time at The Economist at their public policy consulting unit, mainly looking at sort of policy questions and challenges for clients from the tech space, but also from the multilateral space. Right. And then recently have spent time at ByteDance and now am at Qureishy Technologies. Both are short form video applications, one of the hot technologies now, on their trust and safety team. So looking at issues like misinformation, disinformation, fake news, essentially all the bad stuff you can find on social media. And our mission across both these companies at the trust and safety team is user safety. Very happy to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much for that interesting contrast. My background is in Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal. Even though I wasn't a journalist, the Times, the Sunday Times, and then Bloomberg, but I was in the same ecosystem, so I understand exactly where you are. And then when I set up my own podcast platform, I did it in a long form format. This was in 2016, and everybody was saying I'm nuts. I mean, what the hell? Everybody's going short form, and I'm going long form. And I'm old school like you, I guess, where I think the essence of conversations really do come out in this long form format that we're doing. And then from there we can get the nuggets and put it on TikTok or Instagram. But we need to have an insightful, in-depth conversation where our synaptics will flow and stuff. What are your thoughts in terms of pure traditional journalism versus what I would... And then there was a little phase in the middle called citizen journalism, and now we've got this short-form journalism. Where are you on this?
Well, I think that, my view is that digital technologies have really opened up the field of journalism and the field of media. And you have, whether you are writing on a blog, you are doing a podcast, you're making a short form video on TikTok, and you're talking about a country's politics or a country's, socioeconomics, you are contributing in some way to the media environment, right? So, and that I think is what's great. It's access not only for people who want to listen, but people who want to publish. A lot of laws, electronic laws, media laws were created in the 70s and 80s, and are now like sort of catching up to where traditional media is. I feel that there's room for a lot of it. When you look at traditional print publications, you can look at the successful ones like the New York Times and the Economist, and they have a place, even though they might not have the same type of content, right? So content is very different across these platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that when initially The Economist went from a reading magazine straight onto an iPad, it actually failed. It tanked completely because it wasn't to have the same content in a different format until Economist.com was actually relaunched properly. It never quite succeeded. So we consume the content in a different way. Now, just staying with that strand for a minute or so, because I think it's really important to set the tone for today. And that is that the regulator, the whatever bodies that are there regulating the content going through, I don't know what kind of environments we can talk about, but censorship is always there in some shape or form. There's a lot of self-censorship going on because of the environments one lives in, and so on. Have we caught up in the digital space, or how far are we lagging? I know we haven't caught up. How far behind are we?
Well, I would say we are always lagging, right? Because as soon as policy catches up, technology changes. It's not even as soon, right? Before technology, technology is already out of the box. The next one, which we can talk about today too, is the metaverse.
Yes.
How well are today's policies crafted for things that might go on in the metaverse? They are absolutely not crafted for that, right? So, that's the next big change if it takes off. Governments do not have an idea of how to regulate this. They're just catching up with social media and the effects on communities and people of that type of consumption of media. And so the metaverse will change things immensely.
May I challenge you there that they have not caught up with the social media at all, in the sense, and you mentioned the word trust. I start all of my presentations with trust and ethics as the baseline to start with, and truth. So trust, ethic, and truth is the baseline. And today, do we know what truth is? And with deep fakes and the kind of bots that are around there. What's your view on truth? And then I'll talk about your view. I know it's philosophical, and it's early in the morning for us here, but I think it's important to understand what is truth to you, and then we'll follow with trust and ethics.
It's very difficult to define what truth is. I feel that in today's media environment, truth tends to be what is repeated and viewed the most, which is unfortunate. And also, what happens is that there can be relative amounts of truth, right? Depending on how you're situated and what the context is, and how you are undergoing or experiencing a certain situation. So truth is variable. We have to deal with that. The media environment has also become a lot more siloed, right? You because of the way some companies and people approach it, you tend to go into these filter bubbles and things like that. So truth can exist in multiple different forms. And it's difficult to pin down what that means. The easiest way to say it is you know it as an individual when you see it. And I think that kind of sums up my approach to it. Trust and safety, I think those are very important concepts. You're absolutely right. Governments and policies have not caught up to social media applications and their technologies. When we work in trust and safety policy, safety is something that's a little bit easier to define, because your mission is user safety. You essentially want to keep users safe. There are approaches where you remove everything that's bad, and of course that has consequences on censorship. But it's easier to define what safety is. You know what is bad, and you have to make a decision about whether it should be there or it shouldn't be there. That's a bit easier. Trust, on the other hand, I feel is very difficult. It's first of all a two-way process, right? It's you have to trust the app, trust the government, trust someone else, your fellow person on the internet, and that trust needs to come back, and that's very difficult to define and very difficult to establish.
You use the word there, repetitive information, and that becomes our truth. That's scary, because if truth is being defined by what we hear, and that's where the polarization starts coming in, and we get into our specific bubbles. So you keep repeating, and so I think the repetition piece as far as truth is concerned, concerns me in the sense that whoever has got the megaphone will become the established truth. Is that where we're going?
It's difficult to really see where we are going, because I think the demand for information is still extremely high. Let's take the case of an election. Let's say,
Yeah.
how do you define in an instant what is truth, what is a campaign statement, what is an opinion from one of the candidates? It's an opinion doesn't necessarily need to be grounded in truth. It can be an opinion, it can be a forecast, it can be a statement,
Sure.
Whether it's unlikely or not. And so, the unfortunate thing is that the way that let's in print media there are checks and balances, right? For the established and well-known brands, whatever side of the kind of divide you're on, there are editorial rooms, there are editorial decisions, there are strong practices in place to ensure that things are fact-checked, things are not value-based, and things get out in the best way possible. It's very different on social media when you're consuming that. It's very different when there are troll farms or information farms that are just spouting out content that are using the algorithms or using the way they think the algorithms work to spread that content, right? It's not easy for social media companies to catch and to define. And in fact, there's a whole sort of cottage industry that's really developing very fast around how to handle this huge issue.
So one last question, and then I think we've got so many other issues to discuss, and that is that mainstream media is on its decline globally, whether it's look at CNN or any of the others. And one of the key factors is the trust is down to around 22%. This is the United States, and diminishing rapidly. So we don't trust the mainstream media that's coming in. And one of the things that I look at, Sumana, I'd love to hear your perspective on that, is that you bring in a panel on a CNN, and we're talking climate change. And there's a climate denier, and then there's this guy who's talking about science. They're getting equal platform. To me, that level of neutrality takes away from the positioning of truth. If truth is 97, 98, 99%, and only 1% is nonsense, why are we giving? And this is where people are losing ground, because we're just getting all of these conspiracy theories coming up and so on. So trying to be neutral, a lot of the mainstream media is losing their edge in terms of being objective. Objective truth is where the critical essence is. Not like, oh, well, we've got one on the left and one on the right. We've got one for and one against, and therefore it's equal. It's not. There are certain things which are just true. I mean, climate change is not a conversation. It's more like, what do we do now? It's as opposed to people are still on BBC, and I just was watching something yesterday. It is mindless, the kind of stuff that's coming up, and then it just gets into an equal battle, and then it's just noise, and we just switch off, and then just get on with the rest of our lives. So just a quick thought, and then a couple of questions on big tech, and then we start getting into the politics side.
Yeah, it's you raised an issue that really grates me, right? If you bring two people on TV and you ask them, what's the weather forecast today, and one fella says it's going to rain, the other folks says it's going to be sunshine. Yeah. You as the objective presenter don't pick like 50% chance of each, right? So it's difficult. I think that mainstream media, a lot of the needs to be objective and evidence and fact-based, but also deals with the priorities of revenues and having to entertain and capture an audience, and it's a struggle. You brought up that point about trust in mainstream media of 22%. I've seen the Reuters Institute study on mainstream media and media all around the world, and generally that's declining. What's interesting is that even though trust in media is declining, and say trust in social media has been low, that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, because if you do not trust the platform, there is an increasing likelihood that you might say check the fact, or you might use a broader set of news sources to kind of balance out what you're reading. But then you get into the problem that you just talked about, right? But the answer is, how do you move people to be exposed to different sources of news? And digitization has actually been a bit of an issue for that, because when you had the newspaper, when you had good editors putting stories together, if you turn to page 2 and a story interests you, something on page 3 might catch your eye that you might never have read otherwise. That pulls you in a different direction, or that gives you a different type of insight, right? And that type of experience reading the news doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, one of my big issues when it comes to education and learning and development is critical thinking. How little do we spend time at our schools in terms of critical thinking and getting into that thought process, which has become now absolutely critical, pun intended. So anyway, moving on. I mean, the world is like I said, we were sitting at the crossroads of East, West, North, South, both in Singapore and in Dubai. One of the things that's affecting us is the war in Russia and Ukraine, and the contagion and the fallout is actually coming in all sorts of directions. But interestingly enough, both Dubai and Singapore, and to some extent where I'm sitting is in Switzerland, all three of them are net beneficiaries of this, in terms of some of the capital flows, in terms of some of the acceptance, because these are small city-states and island states. So this fallout, where do you think this thing is going at this point in time, and any thoughts and ideas on where this whole direction is?
Well, I have no idea where it's heading, where it's going to go. It's interesting that you look at the IMF latest figures on global economy. They've downgraded for this year. They've downgraded for next year. What's pretty clear is that the war, on top of many other drivers, is also increasing inflation, and that's going to be an issue that central banks all over the world will have to deal with, especially emerging economies, because their borrowing costs are going to rise. And so those are two big issues that are connected, right? So GDP growth going down and inflation going up, and that's going to be the scenario, or just the way of the world for the next 12, 24 months.
About a couple of weeks ago, a report came out that for the first time we have crossed $100 trillion as global GDP. This, on the trajectory, forgetting the short-term issues, is to go to about 150 trillion by 2050 because of the technological shifts that are going on. So the big picture is still pretty good. I think what we really need to do is to address the near term. Let's look at inflation. It's a very easy throwaway that inflation can be, is because of the war. And yes, of course, there are some issues there, but there's supply chain, there's price gouging, big monopolies, because we'll get to that later. Also, the large companies, how they can basically control pricing, whether it's oil or everything else, and really a combination of all of those elements. And the war is just a piece, and we just all hide behind the war. The issues are much more fundamental. What are your thoughts about it, and how are things looking from a perspective of Singapore, looking westward?
Yeah, so you're right. It's not only the Ukraine war, or the war in Ukraine rather, but it has come at a bad time, when all these additional pressures, coming out of the pandemic and disruptions to supply chains had happened. So it is, a big driver now. But you're right to say that problem would have probably existed even without. Looking at Singapore, it's very interesting. I can't speak for Dubai, but during the pandemic, Singapore kind of stayed open, right? Even though we had a short sort of 2-month period of lockdown, there were, factories were open, the airport was still open, even though, it was cut in size considerably. Things were still going on from a trade perspective, right? The port was open. That was fantastic. Of course, a lot of labor left. We had labor crunches and all that sort of issues that many other countries face because borders were closed.
Yeah.
But minimally, it stayed open, and I think that was very, very good and instilled a lot of confidence. And so, by some accident or happy coincidence, a lot of Southeast Asia opened up at the same time, including Singapore, and trade has gotten back. And that's really, really good. In the region itself, Southeast Asia is growing really well. It added 60 million digital natives during the pandemic. That's 10% of the 600,000 people that live in Southeast Asia. That's in Switzerland. That's about like 8 Switzerlands put together, during the 2 years of the pandemic. So there are things that are really excellent about that. Just given the whole environment, one of the things that I think Dubai and Singapore will struggle with is capital will just not be, the returns on capital will just not be as high as before. We are just going into this phase of a great moderation, or given all of the economic headwinds, capital will not be as effective, and we just have to live with that.
Because cheap capital, inexpensive capital, has fundamentally shifted the world, and value of companies is stupid. I mean, they're ludicrous in terms of, because it's just so easy cash is so easy to get. Is that crunch going to shift things, and companies will start coming into more sensible valuations?
Yeah, you've seen a lot of companies, tech companies, their valuations have dropped. I feel that by and large, that's probably a good thing.
Good thing, yeah.
The way that you operate in a market, the way that you approach your customer acquisition, or your, essentially your business strategy changes when capital becomes more expensive, right? So you have to really consider and really prioritize. You have to look for efficiencies rather than just spending money to get certain outcomes. And I think that's a good rationalization. Companies have to operate with the capital environment that they are in. So it's overall, I feel it's a good thing.
Dubai has been exceptionally successful during the pandemic in all sorts of things, and you spoke about the trust. I think the soft trust that was created with the environment that we were in. We never had one day of shortage of anything. I mean, all the supermarkets, etc., were always full, and so on. So it seemed a bit strange when we used to sort of see some of the drama going on in the United States and stuff, because we were very blessed. One of the things that Dubai always has been, and I think it's narrowing now, that when Dubai grows up, it wants to become like Singapore. In other words, we've learned a lot from Singapore. So what are the top 2 or 3 things that are going on in Singapore today that gives you the edge, and that Dubai could learn from and develop?
Tariq, even a shortage of toilet rolls during the pandemic?
I beg your pardon?
Did Dubai not even have a shortage of toilet rolls? Was everybody
no toilet rolls? We had more toilet rolls than you can imagine. There was never a shortage of anything. No, it was surprising. You could walk into a Carrefour or a Spinneys or whatever, and it was just like, hang on, there is no shortage. There is no pandemic. I think the way they managed the food security issue and some back-end supply chain, and then they kept things open, even in the thick of COVID, in the first sort of 6 months or so, where we were really in lockdown and at home and so on. Nothing, absolutely. I mean, I've never felt it. I have never felt that there's something I would like to get and I was not able to get. So that is the short, the supply chain part. But on the other side, the technology was there. New businesses had started coming. Obviously, Zoom exploded, and we had so much online stuff because Dubai's economy is built on tourism, trade, and that flow, very much like to a great extent like Singapore. So it's really a question of how we and we struggled. My business struggled. Capital Club, I mean, people weren't moving in and out. But overall, the bounce back was actually very strong. But that's just the bounce back on the one side. Now, going back to the Singapore question, what is, I mean, from my perspective, and let me share mine, and then perhaps you can give a response to that. My perspective is Singapore is ahead because, number one, education. You still have a monster lead in education and learning and the quality of talent that's coming through. An indigenous population that's super smart and super efficient. Now they need to be super creative. I think that's probably the area that they need to work on. You've got, obviously the infrastructure is outstanding. But a lot of the new technological shifts that are happening, and I see a north-south corridor, Korea in the top, and then some smaller bits in Vietnam and places like that. But Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, this sort of strip top to bottom is seriously interesting in terms of some of the shifts and technological developments that are taking place. What are the key things that you're finding there?
Yeah, so you're spot on, right? Singapore a long time ago got the basics right. Hardworking population, most of them spoke 2 languages, English and one other. High levels of literacy and numeracy. That was all gave us a very good fundamental. During the pandemic and towards looking towards the future, when you're talking about supply chains, what you mentioned, right? The region, the islands in Johor, the Riau Islands, even in Indonesia, in Karimun, have become so interesting because many companies, now are diversifying their supply chains, and they essentially are adopting a Singapore +1 model. So you have certain functions in Singapore that are very high value. They are called like sort of white collar manufacturing. The number of people in manufacturing in Singapore has lessened, but the value added of manufacturing in Singapore has shot up, right? And that's government strategy. It's industrial policy.
Yeah.
So what you have is you might have a function of innovation or design or data science that sits in Singapore, maybe a combination of all of this. Your supply chain center might sit in Singapore, your procurement might sit in Singapore, and then you have production nearby. Dyson, an international company, just moved to Singapore 3 years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but it's a great example of that. They have certain functions in Singapore, but a relatively small team, and their production, so their design is in Singapore, but their production is in Johor. And it works really well. And by the way, those factories in Johor and in Riau, they are going great guns. Those factories are all full. People are manufacturing. And that's what the effect of sort of Singapore +1 because of diversifying supply chains has been. The other phenomenon I think is we've done well because of digitization, right? Singapore. You mentioned that thing about creativity. But Singapore has, I think, over the last decade, become a pretty attractive place for startups. Over half of the 50 biggest startups by funding are based in Singapore. You have a lot of the VCs based in Singapore, and that's good. They are attracted because of strong IP laws, the ability to get talent and bring talent in. And the relative sort of safety of Singapore, and that has done well. I think that in Southeast Asia, the startup size of startup economy is about 170 billion, which is fantastic.
Interesting. About 5 years ago, I was presenting to a bunch of investors, about 30, 40 of them, who had all invested what I would call throwaway money in a crowdfunding platform. For them, it was just $500,000, a few $100,000, $250,000, just to sort of see how the whole world is changing. This is 5-6 years ago, and I was brought in to try and explain how this startup ecosystem is working. And it was very interesting because culturally in Singapore, I mean, you have to be blue-blooded, double masters, straight A students, straight through. And I'm just saying, but these are not the guys who are going to be building the blockchain thing or the new metaverse or whatever. In other words, failure is not something, or experimentation is not something that's culturally comfortable in Singapore. And I think that was my early signal of we'll be doing really well once things are moving. But how do we get past that double masters, right family, best school kind of syndrome that we have, at least we perceive to have in Singapore?
Yeah, I think things have started to change or have changed. And I feel there's several reasons behind this. One is that just the presence of the big tech companies and other tech companies here, the Googles and the ByteDances and things like that, the presence of homegrown, unicorns and big companies like Grab and Lazada, in the region, has just changed that environment, right? So there's a lot of skill and there's a lot of capital because these people have been very successful and they know the local markets, which is incredible. So that has I think really changed the way that people approach the whole startup scene in Singapore. I think we have sort of got past it. The other thing is that a lot of capital has flown in from family offices from Dubai, from China, and they are looking to put a certain portion of their investment portfolio into startups in Singapore. And Singapore has a great ecosystem for housing them, with agencies like A-Star and EDB. It's a very welcoming environment. Plus, you have the capital. So I think that slowly has started to change things.
Right. So let's just touch on some of the questions that are coming in from our listeners and viewers. Robert Willick, this is a question that I was going to ask anyway, but he's articulated rather better. Should we be worried about a political and technological bifurcation between the East and West as China and the US vie for political and economic leadership? And how should companies and countries in the middle navigate that challenge? I think this is it's a brilliant question. It's much wider. But while we're talking about Russia these days, Russia is sort of looking east and very, very comfortably looking east because China is there. And if they could just sort out India and have a friendly relationship with Indonesia and Singapore, the world is divided into two. And this bloc potentially quite strong because younger population, large growing environments, the factory of the world is China, etc., etc. So what are your sort of slightly more creative thoughts on that?
Yeah, a shout out to Rob Willock, who was my colleague at the Economist Intelligence Unit. So I'm glad he's tuning in, and I know he's a fan of the Capital Club as well. First to say it's interesting with Russia. Initially my sense was that when they attacked the Ukraine, they would lose a lot of diplomatic clout. But if you see Sergei Lavrov's visit to Africa recently, and some of the other reactions by countries in Southeast Asia, that hasn't necessarily been the case. So it's a lot more of a complex issue. This question of the bifurcation is a very difficult one. But the best analogy that I've heard is that it's like a pyramid or it's like a zipper. So if you are at the top and if you are in a strategic industry like defense or 5G technology or AI, then there's a lot of competition. And as a company or as a country that's receiving capital or investment in those strategic industries or even purchasing it, you have to be careful of where you are. Right, and the issue with that is that it's also becomes industrial policy, right? Because they are the Americans and the Chinese are sort of choosing these technologies. They are investing in this technology. It is a bit of a force that disrupts how markets or the free market would naturally work. So it's a very cloudy picture up there, but it's much more of a dangerous picture. As you go down the pyramid, so say you come to consumer goods, if you're looking at a can of pop soda, or you're looking at a pair of jeans, then really that question is not so important anymore. There's still connectivity between the two countries. There's still like the ability to diversify the supply chain, and in fact probably have supply chains that are connected for these types of products, right? Now, of course, this may change. That's a lot of talk now. I think Biden and Xi Jinping are supposed to be on the phone tomorrow to try and talk about the relationship between China and the US. And certainly, I think trade will be a big topic. But also, there's concern from about Nancy Pelosi's visit or impending visit to China as well. So, but I think that's the way that
she's going to Taiwan rather than China. I mean, I think.
Sorry, yes. Her visit is to Asia, and it includes Taiwan.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's interesting the way you described it at the top of the pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, I've done a lot of work on the AI and the high-end technological side. A lot of the innovation and the primary innovation is coming in from the United States, but the execution and usage of data and stuff is happening in China, and they are investing, many folds more than the United States when it gets into AI development and a lot of other things, because the state is very, very focused on that, and that is potentially leaving a lot of the companies in the United States behind, because China and the rest of the area will potentially become much, much more robust when it looks at the growth of AI applications and AI-driven products and various other components. Number one. Number two is on the peg to the for oil, for example. I think that is another area they're looking at. So if you get that side moving also. So there are 2 or 3 big areas like that where Asia is actually, and particularly led by China, is doing exceptionally well, or has a lead, and potentially that lead will tend to grow. So, I mean, the word Rob used was, should we be worried? And what do we need to do? Should we be worried, or is this just the natural flow of the world and these are the things that happen?
Should we be worried? Well, we should be conscious of what the environment is, right? Because that is a changing business environment, a changing geopolitical environment, and you, as a business, need to operate in those circumstances. I would probably push you just a little bit on the innovation, in the United States. When you look at certain measures of innovation, like the number of papers that are published, the number of scientists that are graduating and finding jobs, even at the sort of micro level, innovation seems to be very, very high in China. So it's not only the implementation. I would say that the source of innovation is also changing quite a lot.
Yeah. Korea is obviously another amazing place where a lot of innovation is happening, and it's that's also something we will look at. Okay, a few more questions. You nudged us and teased us earlier on about the metaverse. So should we call it metaverse or meta-perverse? Is it in the right place yet? Well, but a friend of mine, Khurram, who's based out of Toronto, Canada, he called me a couple of months ago and he said, "Bro, we've just become the biggest landlords in the world." Now, he's a rich Indian businessman, so I'm assuming okay. I said, "Okay, cool." He said, "No, actually, the world's largest landlord on the metaverse." I said, "Oh my God, what does that mean? But you got to take me one step at a time." And but then he explained a bit more in terms of JP Morgan's and the Citibanks of the world are actually pushing him, because they've been quietly working in the background and doing the data mining and stuff. Companies called iMining Technologies. The reason I'm mentioning this is that it changed my perspective of how the metaverse is being seen by the major organizations. They all want to buy real estate on it. They all want to buy a placement on it. Now, so metaverse is probably where the internet was in 1995 in terms of its development. But is it here to stay? Is this where we're going to be doing our future business? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as to where your friend bought his property in the metaverse, right?
He built it. He actually built it. He did all the mining and the back end work over the last 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah.
And basically said, while everybody else was running around, we were just very good at doing the mining, the Bitcoin mining, using their blockchain and so on. Again, I need to understand it more, but I just thought, anyway, that was his context.
Yeah. And so we essentially what I feel is that, not everybody has a conception of what the metaverse actually is. It certainly hasn't reached its final kind of destination and form and function. You have the what Mark Zuckerberg has described for Meta and that pivot. And what was interesting is that after he announced that, and there are certain elements that are very visible already and are kind of functioning already. Neither Google nor Apple mentioned in their next sort of quarterly earnings or their developer conferences much about the metaverse. When you look at the fundamental structure of what a metaverse could look like, the building blocks to me seem to be a lot more in terms of what Apple has, in terms of its app store, right? Those could be fundamental building blocks and how consumers interact with a so-called metaverse. Fundamentally, though, the metaverse has not found its killer app, right? The app that sort of changes everything and gives people an idea of what it is, right? But when you look at certain elements of it, and you look at it from in my world in trust and safety, it becomes so complex, right? What if you had an AI generated chatbot that took over or created your persona, Tariq, and went around, harassing people in the metaverse, right? That AI doesn't belong to anybody. It's your identity, so-called identity, and you are committing a crime in a place where we don't really know how it exists from a legislative point of view. So it becomes very, very complex. And like I said, I think at the beginning, governments really are not prepared for that. And so it's really kind of open territory as to how that will develop.
Some of the key issues, I'm just reading a post from a friend of mine. She's a professor in Switzerland, in Zug, on metaverse, Dr. Martha. And she wrote this post and she said, some of the key issues to address is anti-monopoly and pro-privacy, secure networks, data ownership, interoperability, no interruption of service, permissionary blockchains, semantic web, ubiquity. I mean, she said these are some of the key issues that are coming up, which almost immediately starts bringing about some reality to this space. He's talking about experiences at the top, infrastructure at the bottom, stopping at a human interface, decentralization, spatial computing, creator economies, and a lot of discoveries along the way. Now, there's a lot of new stuff. Dubai has gone nuts as far as the metaverse is concerned in a very positive way. They want it to be the center. 5,000 new companies are going to be set up, 40,000 new people are being attracted, and so on. So it's, for us here, it's real. Now, question of how do you make that reality into something which is genuinely meaningful for us, how will we develop that? I think that, to me, how do we develop content? How do we develop trust? What are the kinds of rules on pornography or censorship or things like that? Where are we on this? How far away are we on this? Obviously, Web 3.0 is developing also. So are we looking at a year to 2 years' time, or is it accelerating further than that, or we're still 5 years away?
Yeah, I think it's picking up. I have no idea how long we are away from the creation of a metaverse. But I think it's interesting when you mentioned Dubai. in that light, and I can draw a comparison to Singapore, is that both Dubai and Singapore want to be hubs for various industry, and it's in the government policy or industrial policy to try to be attractive to certain industrial niches, right? And Dubai's foray into being a metaverse hub is one of those. But it's a trade-off. The question is, what are they trading off against? How will they be able to attract these companies? What particular incentives will they give? How will they attract the talent to come and be part of it? And like you said when you read out your friend's LinkedIn post, there's so many issues which require different sorts of skills, right? Data scientists, engineers, software developers, public policy folks. The whole sort of industry has to be created around this new concept. And right now, it seems to be quite a distant future.
Yeah. So a couple of other questions moving on from there. Well, we were talking about the metaverse, so let's just have one nasty question on tech. Do you think big tech should be broken up? And how rapidly should that happen, and how will we do it?
I don't know. Should big tech be broken up? Maybe in certain instances, from an anti-monopolistic point of view. But they've also created so much innovation and so much value that it's hard to see it, right? They have been monopolistic, or they have grown to be seen in some cases as monopolies, not by design, but rather by demand. And so I think that's a very kind of tricky issue and area. And to be honest, I don't know too much about it.
Amazon has recently made a bid for one of the biggest e-health companies in the United States, around 900,000 users. And the Monopoly Commission is talking about that. And basically, I think Amazon has got a powerful enough lobby, and they will go through. Now, they'll start delivering some good value and medicines at home and all this kind of stuff, which is great. But then they'll start cross-fertilizing everything from all of the Amazon Prime and stuff. And before you know, we've lost our privacy. Our data is everywhere. They're selling insurance and they're selling all sorts of stuff to us. And guess what? Where I'm going with this is that they can stifle young companies coming up. They can stifle startups and growth companies by doing this kind of stuff. And just because we get numbed to the quality that we potentially receive, at some stage they need to be I wouldn't say curtailed is the wrong word, that would be anti-progress, but somehow align with the values around us, and hyper-capitalism shouldn't be the only value to recover. Social good should be there, conscious conscious support should be there. There should be other elements brought in. And I don't even want to go down the tax model, because they'll tax and then spend money on defense. I mean, it doesn't really. So it needs to be some kind of a social structure where Amazon makes, and every additional dollar it gives 1 cent to, I don't know, UBI or healthcare, or specifically. So a new model has to be discovered.
Yeah, I would challenge the notion that it stifles young companies. I sit here in Southeast Asia, and the environment for startups is so frothy, and they are not here to be sold to an Amazon. They are here to actually look at very local challenges and local sort of business issues and local user and consumer demands, and solve for them, right? And this digitization has been incredible. Singapore is, from when you look at all the indices, always tops every kind of index of digitization. But some of the true innovation happens in the Philippines or in Indonesia or somewhere else, and there's actually a lot of lessons that entrepreneurs and companies in Singapore can learn from that. So I don't necessarily see, especially in Southeast Asia, that stifling of innovation that you describe. Now, of course, the process that you described in terms of becoming so large and offering products and things like that are very mixed. I feel that there are laws around privacy, there are laws around competition that will need to deal with those types of issues.
Currently, they're not working, but anyway, that's for another occasion. Wojciech Walecki, a question which is extremely relevant, and that is our views on centralization versus decentralization, in particular DAOs, which are becoming quite common. DAO, for people who don't understand, is a decentralized autonomous organization. Can you give a simple explanation, or should I venture to do that?
Can you do that? That's the first time I've heard of a DAO.
Okay, fine. The new business models that are being created, one of them is called a decentralized autonomous organization, and what basically it is built on the blockchain, where because of the blockchain, the decision structure and the dispersion of the trust structure can be much wider, and many companies are actually starting to build a DAO concept for their organizations, and so it's becoming very popular in and around the. It'll be very popular in the metaverse space. It'll be very popular while building communities of much more broad-based communities, and also companies that have a large sense of sort of collective gathering that is there. So the fact that somebody as advanced as you is not familiar with the DAO shows that this is something that still needs to be developed, and I think the hype is very high. But have a look at it. It is a very interesting space. I hope I've done some justice to it.
No, so it's interesting. So from what you have explained, there are two enormous upsides, right? It's part of it is maybe one of the best uses of blockchain technology, which is to instill trust, right? You are able to trust all along, up and down the chain. And the second part of it is to eliminate the middleman, right? So you could exchange money, which is a lot of the cryptocurrencies, but here you could exchange different types of products, what have you. Even within your business process, that could be enormously efficiency gaining. So those are two immediate upsides that I think about. I can't think of the downsides now, but I'm sure that there are many.
I think there are downsides are going to be in terms of very broad-based decision making and so on. But the upsides, you're absolutely right. You remove so much friction, and part of the Bitcoin revolution can work from there. Companies can come in and create their own economies. Companies being an economy itself, Procter & Gamble will become an economy and do it on a decentralized DAO basis. So for all of their suppliers and partners will be on a DAO, and then that's how they start communicating. They can start issuing coins and creating new value through that process. Still a young space, but certainly one that will emerge in the next 1 to 2 years very strongly, I believe. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes to go. Let's just do some rapid questions. What should we be running towards? Gold or Bitcoin and crypto? Because crypto is so low right now. Are we going to get a better time to buy Bitcoin? Because
I don't know the answer to that. What I can tell you is that I feel that for blockchain technology, a lot of emphasis has gone into financial services, right, and creating cryptocurrencies. And I feel that technology has so much more to offer than just crypto.
Okay. Any opportunities from Widyan? We had what kind of opportunities for partnerships do you see between Dubai and Singapore as sister cities, as twin cities? What sort of things can we do?
Yeah, I think that that's interesting. It's what is the Singapore +1 or the Dubai +1 model when it comes to Singapore and Dubai. Now, obviously, the expertise in the region, like I feel that is something that can be mixed. People that tend to be able to do business and know the business environment in Southeast Asia don't necessarily know it in the Middle East, right? And that is something, that cross fertilization of business ideas and techniques and companies and capital could certainly be very promising. I think that's one thing where Singapore and Dubai could collaborate. In essence, though, they seem to be very competing types of cities, right? Their models are very similar. They try to be regional pinpoints or pivot points for the regions they are in, and have done that very, very successfully. But I feel that there's so much transfer of business knowledge from the two countries. And we're seeing that a lot more, like I said, I think a lot more capital from Dubai has come to Singapore during the pandemic, and I'm sure it flows the other way too.
Yeah. I think Dubai has also positioned itself very well as far as Africa is concerned. It's really a beachhead for China going into Africa. Basically, all the work is being done out of Dubai. So Africa as an emerging continent, as literally the final frontier, is going to be huge. Quick comments on things like cybersecurity. I mean, there are a lot of things going on right now. A quick comment, and then we wrap up with your final thoughts.
Yeah, one of the major issues in the world, I think it is right up in the discussion that we had about the bifurcation, especially in strategic technologies. Cybersecurity sits right there, and it has had so much of an impact, not only in the US, but also in China, right? If you look at Didi Chuxing and their listing and then subsequent delisting by the CAC, that was cybersecurity related, and one of huge ripple effects on how investors might view China because of that. And so yes, big huge issue.
Right. Sumana, we're getting to the top of the hour. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes to go. We had a sort of meandering conversation, starting all the way from journalism and media into your experience with TikTok and ByteDance and so on, and how that's become a phenomenon to some political issues. So it's been a nice, interesting, meandering chat. What are the critical 2 or 3 things that we should be thinking of as we look forward? What are your sort of guidelines to us, for tomorrow morning or for today? I mean, we're still halfway. In terms of our thoughts to go forward with, things that we should be looking at, and topics we should be researching and thinking about.
Yeah, I think in the near to medium term, the 3 things or phrases that hit my mind would be inflation, would be supply chain disruptions and the effect on the business environment, and then would be cybersecurity and data privacy in those key strategic industries.
When we had our brief chat, you mentioned inflation and the impact of something like prices of data on inflation, and how something small can fundamentally change the game. Can you please share that wonderful story?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So we, as many economists, many central banks in the world, when they look at inflation, they obviously look at it from a consumer price index or something that's generalized across their whole economy. They might collect prices of thousands and thousands of goods, but the rate that they use to set policy is always like a common rate. And so to you and me, that rate may mean one thing for sort of generalized economic future, but in our own day-to-day lives, that is essentially meaningless, right? Because we have different consumption habits, we have different spending habits. You may have an electric car, I might have a petrol car, and so my prices might have gone up a lot more than yours. And so I think that what we really need to have is tools that allow consumers to look at how the inflation or the basket of goods that are personal to them are affected by inflation or deflation, right? And I do feel that there are certain goods, and certain goods become very, very important, and data is one of them, right? We are so used to being able to afford data, to use our mobile phones for education, for shopping, for getting around, for so many issues. But if you think about folks who have to make decisions because prices of basic goods have gotten higher and they need to substitute them with other goods. How much or where does it become critical, and how can they afford data? And that to me is a big question. It's something that we should be looking at. I feel very impassioned about that.
Thank you very much. Now, there are huge opportunities for partnership and cross-fertilization, and I dare say we will come. There was a question from Sumin on that, not enough time to address it properly, but I dare say there will be a lot of opportunities between us, between Singapore and Dubai, between us and the cross-fertilization of business. We started with the word trust. Let's end with the word trust and why and how it's so important. So a final comment on why is trust in your new role one of the key things that is going to help to shape the future as you see it?
Well, I mean, it's fundamental. I think without trust, everything, you start to question everything. And so when there's trust, and importantly, two-way trust, it's just much easier for your day-to-day life. And that's fundamentally how I view it.
Yeah, super. My friend, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your candid thoughts, and best of luck in your new role as you move forward, going back to where you started. So that's a wonderful way to, obviously they love your work. And I dare say we will be encountering and meeting up again, either in Singapore or in Dubai. Sumana, thank you very much indeed from Singapore. And thank you for all of the guests who attended. Thank you to Capital Club who helped to set it all up. Thank you for everybody. All the best. Have a lovely day. Cheers. Bye.